How many of you feel like you're extroverted? How many of you feel like you're introverted? Those personality traits are caused by our genes, but are then reinforced and amplified by our environment. I have read a large number of articles from well-informed and respected writers which discuss the impacts of nature versus nurture and have come to the conclusion that nurture has a longer lasting effect on our personality compared to our nature. In the Google form, I asked you all whether you supported nature or nurture more in our behavioral development. Around 90% of you supported nurture, such as because you are the result of your choices and the choices made around you. These results are comforting and will aid me in delivering a speech which relates to the majority of your beliefs, and it will help me in persuading you into believing that nurture has a greater impact in our personality. Throughout my speech, I will address the influence of nurture in our behavior with the aid of multiple examples and statistics, but will also acknowledge the impact that nature plays in our lives as well. In the article, Personality is a Product of Nature, Nurture, or Personal Choice by Thomas S. Parrish and Ryan Barnes, it talks about the effects of our genes, environment, and personal choices on our personalities. The first example of a genetic influence, as stated in the article, it comes from a gene called D4DR on chromosome 11. This gene provides the genetic programming for the development of a protein called dopamine. Dopamine, when there are large amounts produced in your body, can cause schizophrenia, but also when there are low amounts can cause a dithering personality, which renders an individual's body relatively motionless. The environmental example explained in the article states that some hallucinogenic drugs have both found to stimulate the dopamine system. This stimulation can cause different amounts of dopamine to be produced in somebody's body. And for example, low amounts can also cause boredom, while high amounts can cause type of exploration attitude. The idea of personal choice in the article shows how we can control how efficient and happy we are in our lives, but we have to work hard to accomplish this. Now that we know that we are not controlled entirely by one of these factors, but by them all working together, let's now look at an article that shows how nurture has a greater impact out of the three. In the article, Why Nurture Wins Every Time by Oliver James, he discusses how a child's behavior has the ability to be impacted by their environment instead of solely by their genes. In the article, they inform us about how our behaviors are shaped by multiple environments, such as parenting, social class background, gender socialization, and quality of your teaching at a particular school. In other words, we are the product of multiple environments working together. Oliver then concludes by informing us about the great tool twin studies provide. He states, they demonstrate great swaths of psychology comes out only 10 to 30% genetic. This is suggesting that the rest of our psychology comes from our environment. He then explains how many of our everyday actions and beliefs do not hold any heritability either, but are rather impacted by nurturing factors such as our relationship patterns, whom we fancy, or the propensity to criminal violence. Now that we are aware of how we are not restrained entirely by our genes to determine our personality traits, let's discuss a specific example of the effects of nurture between two different personality types. In the article, Nature and Nurture in Personality Development, the Case of Neuroticism and Extroversion by Christian Candler, it discusses an overview of the environmental and genetic contributions to rank order continuity and change, or also known as the consistency of an individual differences within a group in the personality traits of neuroticism and extroversion. Candler explains how both genetic and environmental factors influence our behavior, and he states, both genetic factors affect rank order change only in younger decades of life, whereas environmental influences appear to represent a lifelong source of inter-individual differences in personality development. This quote shows how environment plays a longer lasting role in our personality development and contributes to an increasing amount in our differences in our personality. So in other words, our genes predispose some of our earlier personality traits, but the environment alters them as we age. The next article further supports the idea in which our genes are the base of our personalities, but that our environments are what enhances them. In the article, From Abused Child to Serial Killer, Investigating Nature versus Nurture and Methods of Murder by Nicola Davies, she talks about different perspectives of nature versus nurture by looking at the effects it has on violent individuals. First off, Davies acknowledges that the nurture influence of abuse from parents towards their children does not always result in violent adults, but that the situation does occur. Davies writes, traumatic experiences, especially during childhood, can have an even deeper impact in adult life. They can significantly change an individual's personality and life choices. Davies then informs us how our genes and environment interact together. She states, for example, those with a specific variant of the enzyme monoamine oxidase A gene are more prone to displaying violent behavior if they have had an abusive upbringing. A child susceptible to genetically driven conduct does not necessarily become a criminal. However, genetics in tandem with environmental factors, such as violent childhood experiences, work together to shape a person. This article illustrates how our genes would load the gun and our experiences pull the trigger. Let's now look at two specific twin studies which observe and support the environmental influences on a child's development. The main purpose of Jean Phelps' article, Nature, Nurture, and Twin Research Studies, was to increase awareness at the encouraging efforts researching monozygotic or identical twins have in studying the effects of nature versus nurture in our behavior. The first study, the Corian control studies, investigated prenatal influences with measures of intelligence, cognition, personality, and psychopathology, and showed results which suggest how our shared prenatal environment greatly influences those psychological aspects of an individual. The co-twin control studies explore environmental influences by investigating differences in monozygotic co-twins, which are identical twins, and suggest those differences in personalities are due to the environmental events occurring after conception. The final example comes from an article that examines a gene which uses serotonin to control an individual's behavior. In Education's article, The Development of a Child's Personality, Nature and Nurture, it examined the influence of a specific gene called 5-HTT when traumatic events occur in childhood. The gene, as stated in the article, affects how the brain uses serotonin, and shows how when someone has two short copies of this gene, they are more susceptible to extreme emotions such as depression if they have experienced traumatic events. But they can also have heightened feelings of happiness when their parents are welcoming and kind towards them. In conclusion, a large number of examples and studies show how important our environmental influence is when shaping our personalities, and should be taken seriously to ensure the best possible future. Nature and nurture both impact our lives, but whenever possible, make sure you look around and acknowledge your ability to change your surroundings when needed so that you can foster your desired personality as an individual. Thank you.